Discover your learning options at the Institute for Mergers, Acquisitions, and Alliances. We understand that each professional has unique needs. That's why we offer flexible learning options designed to help you achieve your goals while accommodating your busy lifestyle. Select from our comprehensive M&A certification programs and decide when, where, and in which format you would like to participate in. Our on-site classes deliver an immersive and intensive learning experience in different locations across the globe. Connect and network with fellow professionals while strengthening cross-cultural understanding and broadening your perspective. Prefer studying from your office or home? Our virtual live classes provide the same high-quality instruction and interaction, all in a convenient and accessible format. Short on time? No worries. Our online self-study classes are accessible 24/7, allowing you to earn your certification at your own pace. Whichever you choose, you'll be joining a global network of professionals committed to excellence. Choose EMA and elevate your career in mergers and acquisitions. The webinar is about to begin. Please stand by.
Hello and welcome to our webinar today, Unraveling Carve-Out Complexity and Optimizing People Strategy for Success. To our returning attendees, it's wonderful to see so many familiar names and faces joining us once more. Thank you. If you're here for the first time, please allow me to give you a brief introduction. We are the Institute for Mergers, Acquisitions and Alliances, or EMA, a leading think tank in mergers and acquisitions and in M&A certification and training. My name is David Olson, Managing Director of EMA, and I'll be your host for today. So before we dive into the heart of today's topic, I'd like to mention that we'll have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. We encourage you, please, to jot down any questions you might have during the webinar so that our speaker can address them later. The chat is available for everyone, so please do send us your questions or messages, whether you're experiencing any concerns with our streaming. Our team are on standby to address your questions. Please do stay to the end of the session as we've got some special announcements that I think you will like to see. This session is pivotal for corporate buyers, sellers, and PE firms who aim to excel in managing M&A carve-out transactions, with a sharp focus on optimizing people strategy. Carve-outs themselves are notoriously and notably complex. They demand meticulous planning and a strategic approach to human capital. People are the linchpin in ensuring not only a smooth transition from one owner to the other, but also in achieving anticipated benefits post-deal. In this session, we will dissect the layers of complexity inherent in carve-outs and provide you with actionable strategies, insights, and best practices. Our expert panel guides you through key considerations for all parties involved in the transaction, for strategies, mitigating risks, and again, maximizing value throughout the process. To shed further light on this topic, EMA has invited the experts from Mercer. It is my pleasure to introduce the moderator for today's session, Susan Potter, who will then introduce our two speakers, Chuck Moritt and Abhi Gopal, both of whom work for the Mercer M&A Advisory Services. Susan Potter is Mercer's US and Canada president, where they serve approximately 10,000 domestic and multinational clients across the region. Susan has more than 30 years of experience as a business leader and consultant, and is a steadfast champion of bringing the depth and breadth of products and solutions from across Marsh. Susan, over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. So hello, everybody. As David said, I'm Susan Potter, president of Mercer US and Canada. I'm absolutely delighted to be here today as the moderator of this webinar and to introduce our speakers. So first, we have Chuck Moritt, a partner in Mercer's M&A Advisory Services. With over 30 years of global transaction and human resources experience, Chuck has advised on more than 250 corporate and PE transactions, including significant deals in finance, aerospace, and manufacturing. He leads our newly formed Global Carve-Out Specialty Group and has extensive experience across all aspects of people and workforce management. Chuck also serves as a strategic advisor to Go Global, a global employer of record service provider. Next, we have Abhi Gopal, a principal in Mercer's M&A Advisory Services. Abhi has over 15 years of HR experience, including global transactions across various industries. She excels in developing human capital strategies, designing HR models, and overseeing post-merger integrations. And she co-leads our newly formed Global Carve-Out Specialty Group along with Chuck. All right, so let's dive into today's topic with our expert panel. I thought I would set the stage a bit first with a quick overview of Marsh McLennan, Mercer's parent organization. So Marsh McLennan, many of you may know, is the world's leading professional services firm in the area of risk, strategy, and people. We have more than 85,000 colleagues and annual revenue of $23 billion. Marsh McLennan is made up of 4 businesses. I spoke about Mercer. We also have Marsh, Oliver Wyman, and Guy Carpenter. I'll share a little bit about each business, starting with Mercer. Mercer builds brighter futures for organizations by redefining the world of work, reshaping retirement and investment outcomes, and also unlocking health and well-being. At Mercer, we have about 20,000 colleagues in 43 countries. Marsh is the world's leading insurance broker and risk advisor. Marsh serves commercial and individual clients with data-driven risk solutions and advisory services. Oliver Wyman is a global leader in management consulting with specialized expertise in strategy, operations, risk management, and business transformation. And last but not least, Guy Carpenter. Guy Carpenter is a leading global risk and reinsurance firm that focuses on helping its clients with reinsurance and capital strategies. So it's exciting. So when working together with our clients, we enhance the value we bring by bringing the power of perspective across all 4 businesses of Marsh McLennan. And a great example of Marsh McLennan's businesses working together is a recent global carve-out in the consumer packaged goods space, where Mercer and Marsh worked jointly to stand up and operationalize the carved-out business. Together, we brought more value to the client than either of us could do alone, and that is the power of Marsh McLennan. All right, I think we're ready to get started. So Chuck, why don't we start with the first question here? And maybe we start with a quick overview first of how Mercer strategically supports our clients with M&A services.
Yeah, great, Susan. Thanks for the question. Hello, everybody. I also want to say thank you for joining the webinar today. Thank you for EMA for partnering with us on this really critically important topic. And we're looking to have a lot of fun here for the next hour or so with you. So to the question, overview of how Mercer strategically supports clients around M&A. First, a view of our M&A practice itself. We are a global practice with 150 dedicated full-time consultants that are present across all regions of the world. And so our focus is day to day, all day, every day on the totality of the transaction space, working on mergers, acquisitions, divestitures, joint ventures, IPOs, and we'll dive into more of that as we get into today's discussion. The other point that I'd like to make is our perspective at Mercer about people in transactions. And in fact, we believe that people are in fact one of the most critical aspects of a transaction, equal to importance of the commercial aspect of a transaction, the financial piece, the operational side, because at the end of the day, it always converges down to people doing the right things to support the business strategy, model, and operations. The way we work with clients is first illustrated by the graphic at the bottom of the page, that continuum there, that's the deal life cycle process. And this is true whether you're on the buy side or the sell side. So if we think about the major activities in a transaction, we have the diligence aspect of it to confirm whether the deal thesis makes sense from a buyer, and then supporting the valuation model. If the deal's then going to go through, working from the sign to close period to ensure day one readiness on both the buy and the sell side. And then once the deal closes, setting and establishing both the short-term and the long-term integration strategy or operating strategy in the case of a carve-out, and then working over a longer period of time for the value creation. We do that through the host of issues that you see in the 6 circles on the page, through the various HR issues that go in determining having the right people strategy, the right people operating model, the right total rewards strategy to enable the workforce to be able to have, valuable and successful careers, and to enable that going forward. So we work with our clients to help develop the strategy, the operating plan, and manage that through the implementation process. So what you could really think of us as, we are the people in transactions, and really ensure that the value of that transaction through the lens of people is realized over time. Thanks, Susan. Back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. We're the people in the transaction. So very helpful background on how Mercer helps clients in this space. So let's go on and talk a little bit more about the external drivers generating market demand for carve-outs.
Yeah, so what we've listed on the page, there's the 5 interrelated drivers that are really creating the need and the demand in the carve-out space right now. The first one, around strategic refocusing and shifting priorities, is predominantly a sell-side view. So many organizations that go through carve-outs are typically complex conglomerates that have multiple business operations, multiple business focus, and different commercial activities. they continually look at where they want to continue to invest, where they may want to disinvest, and then therefore that is what spawns the carve out. So for example, we have a very complex organization that had two major strategic areas. One was focused in technology in the SaaS space, and the other one was focused on specialized manufacturing of precision instruments. That particular organization decided they wanted to invest all of their money into the SaaS and technology side of the business, less so on the tech side of the specialty manufacturing, and therefore carved out that business for sale. So then the flip side of that, the buy side, private equity and or corporate, is the dynamics of those investment opportunities. So if we just follow the thread for a minute, this specialty uh, industrial business was now up for sale. Private equity firm saw a real value opportunity there because in fact it was underinvested in by the parent. They were able to then say, you know what, we're interested in that. It provides a growth opportunity for us, and therefore we can invest in that and then realize investment opportunities for investors. Similarly, corporate buyers may see one seller's non-core asset totally in their wheelhouse as a core asset and provide them the opportunity to very rapidly grow their business by acquiring additional capabilities, either geographically, adjunct capabilities, or things of that nature. Carve-outs also typically are lower in size than a lot of the mega deals that many of you might be familiar with. And so as a result of lower size, it makes it more economically feasible from a debt financing or other capitalization approach, and or it'll fly under the radar screen of heavy regulatory scrutiny. So all these things have created a significant additional market demand. And then that market demand has created the need from educated buyers to determine that they need specialized expertise in the case of carve-outs. And so that expertise is in the form of playbooks, toolkits, people that have done these deals before, know how to look around the corner and identify and advance the many issues that carve-outs and challenges that present themselves, which we're going to get into in a little bit further.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Chuck. I think having that explanation on the current external environment that drives this is really helpful to this discussion. And Abhi, I'm gonna ask you to address this next one. You know, we're using this term carve out. Can you help us get level set here a little bit? You know, spend a few minutes describing, you know, what a carve out is and what makes it so challenging strategically and operationally.
Sure, Susan, I'm happy to take that question. So carve-out transaction, also known as a spin-off or a divestiture, is really a corporate restructuring strategy where typically a large company would separate and sell a part of its business. Now, it could be a specific business unit, it could be a division, a subsidiary, or an asset that the company may want to sell. So for the purposes of our discussion here, let's assume that Parent Co. is the company that wants to separate and sell business unit 3 or BU3 that you highlighted, that you see highlighted on the screen here in green. Parent Co. may want to separate and sell BU3 because probably over a period of time, BU3 has ceased to be the core asset for the company. Now, it's important to note that BU3 sits within the larger ecosystem of the parent with significant entanglements with the parent and is never really operationally independent on its own. We would see entanglement in terms of strategy and oversight, where Parent Co. and BU3 share strategic, share the overall, executive, shared leadership. They share operational functions and operational infrastructure. They also share corporate functions such as HR, IT, and finance. Now, even the external stakeholders are shared in terms of customers, suppliers, and partners. So now taking this business unit 3, extracting it out from the parent is really what we say carving out BU3. And it's also important to note that when the BU3 is carved out, it'll be either stood up as a standalone company, which is often the case in case of a private equity buyer, or it could be also integrated with an existing business for the buyer, which is typical in case of a corporate buyer. Now, in the current state, it's entangled, right? So on day one, it's never fully extracted. So the parent company would still continue to support the BU3 to ensure business continuity on day one by providing certain transitional transitional services, or we can call them TSAs. Now, the journey from day one and steady state could be dependent on purely negotiations between the parent and the buyer, right? And dependent on the length of the TSAs. It's also important to note that the buyer will need to rethink the strategy, will need to uncover all of the people issues and risks to kind of make sure that it's a smooth transition to a standalone or to a future integrated business. So now that we understand what a carve out is, let's also talk about why it's so messy after all. What makes it so challenging, right? So to start with, almost every time the buyer will inherit an incomplete business. And this specifically amplifies the challenges when it's a private equity buyer that is intending to operate the business as a standalone, right? So you're getting an incomplete business. There is an element to rebuild that business to be fit for purpose and fit to scale from a people, structure, system, and cost standpoint. Um, an example would be, from our previous illustration between the parent co and the BU3, parent co was using a very complex homegrown IT system, which may not be fit for purpose for a standalone carved out BU3. So, the BU3 may use a much simpler and off the shelf IT system. Now, there are complexities with the deal structure. There could be asset and stock structures in the same transaction, which need to be dealt very differently from a people standpoint. So that adds to the complexity. There are often leadership, key talent, and skill gaps that we've seen that, comes with acquiring an incomplete business. So again, the top leadership we've mostly seen is non-existent in most of the carve-outs. And the current carve-out leadership, so in our previous example, BU3 leadership, may need to step up to be, to be in the role of the C-suite, which may not be always seamless transition, which also could require interim leadership hiring needs. We talked about entanglements. Now, the operational strategy and often aggressive timelines also contribute to the complexity of the overall transaction, and more so in cases where there is high levels of entanglement and at the same time, no TSAs. So in almost half a dozen deals that we've done this year, it has operated in a no HR TSA environment, putting immense pressure on the buyer to have an operational HR function on day one to ensure business continuity. And then global nuances, right? They may lead to staggered close across the globe, depending on the various laws and regulations of specific countries or regions. So those are just some of the very high level and some of the very specific challenges we often see in carve-outs.
Great, thanks, Abhi. Yeah, that was a very thorough explanation of the carve-out. I think that helps us all kind of really understand exactly what we're talking about here. And of course, you talked about being messy, right? There's a lot of challenges with this type of transaction. So thank you. Okay, so let's keep going. And Shaq, maybe you can expand a bit further on this one. What are some of the key considerations when we're advising clients on a people strategy during a carve-out?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Susan. And so I'm going to piggyback off of the 6 items and considerations that Abhi was talking about. And then the view that the participants have on the screen right now really tells our total comprehensive story about how those considerations that Abhi was talking about start to manifest themselves in the go forward looking strategy. So on the left-hand side, we're going to have an enterprise view of the organization. And what I'd like to say that either on the left-hand side of the enterprise view or on the right-hand side, which we'll get to, which is HR function, this really represents what I like to call the dual remit of HR. So HR's role and responsibility, both on a business as usual basis, but also in a transaction and a carve-out / stand-up basis, is both to enable the enterprise to be operational, and I'll get into that a little bit along the left-hand side, and then do the business of HR, which is on the right-hand side. So what's it mean to get the enterprise operational? The first way we like to think about it from organizational construct is from this notion that a business is built from a front, middle, and back construct. The front of the house being those commercial operations. This is what touches the customer, the client directly, and where the company makes its money. So you have the sales function, the account management function, marketing, anything that's very public facing in order to generate the commercial activity. The middle of the house are those enabling activities such as strategic sourcing, R&D, manufacturing, the case of a manufacturing business, that support the front end of the house or the commercial operations. And the back of the house are the classical enabling functions of finance, HR, IT, legal, risk that support the business overall. So the first element to really consider in establishing the ongoing carve out and operations is the construct across front, middle, back. What's the business model, which leads to the operating model? The operating model then leads to the org design. So many people think about about the sticks and boxes of an organization and the various reporting relationships across spans and layers. And then the sticks and boxes yield the talent strategy itself, which gets translated to, in those boxes, who do I need? What do I need them to do? What's the skills, capabilities, and competencies? So we work with the organization very closely with business leadership across the C-suite to define the front, middle, back, the substreams that are articulated under each of those, and what ultimately that talent strategy is through org design, then enable that through developing a very comprehensive culture, change, and communication and engagement plan to ensure a smooth transition and business continuity, facilitate retention across key critical aspects of the workforce. And then, most importantly, in a transaction, I want to call out that a lot of times gets left to the side and people aren't aware of till they really get into the middle of it. And I'll go back to Abhi's point about buying an incomplete business. When you buy an incomplete business and then you have to stand up something that looks like this on the page, there's a significant talent acquisition and hiring requirement that's needed across all aspects of the organization. Sometimes we might need C-suite talent. Sometimes we might need talent in the N-2 and N-3 levels to fill out what we're not getting because what isn't in the deal perimeter. So that's the left-hand side of the enterprise. And then on the right-hand side is the business of HR. How does HR is set up as a function to operate to support the enterprise? And so we look at very detailed level what the HR service delivery model is, how it's going to be enabled through technology and other operating systems and processes, what that employment transition is going to look like in a carve-out. Because in many cases, back to the notion of what's a carve-out, we're extracting people from their existing ecosystem and putting them into a totally different environment. So that transition strategy is really important. And then developing Abhi's terms, fit for purpose organization, also fit for purpose total reward strategy. So do we have the right plans, programs, and policies that fit the strategy of the business, fit the workforce and the talent strategy that we need, and is it fit for purpose in the organization? So Susan, that's a broad glimpse of what we do and what we think about here, and there's tremendous detail underneath of it.
Yeah, I think you highlighted, I mean, there's a lot, right? There's a lot in the HR area and a lot in the people side to think about during any transaction, but especially during a carve out. So, all right, well, let's talk a little bit next about buyer priorities during a carve out. And Chuck, I think you were going to get us started on that one.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I was actually looking at some of the questions in the
Yes,
the comments
good questions.
to weave anything in, which I'll come back to. Hence the lag. Yeah. So going back to the earlier page that we were going through, the key priorities at for the dual unit of HR, another critical focus from a business point of view, and I would say the most critical purpose, is to ensure business continuity at close and after close to avoid any disruption in business from an operational standpoint, customer disruption, operational disruption, financial disruption. So it's really important to focus on those key and critical activities from the people standpoint to ensure that business continuity for all stakeholders. That's going to be facilitated by identifying and retaining key talent. And I know a lot of people, when you hear the word retention, it means throw money at people. Our view is 100% opposite of that. It's 180-degree different. What we think needs to be done first is ensure that people are aware of what the future opportunity for them looks like in the carve-out company or the new buyer, and ensure that that's stabilized. And then if there is an economic need to manage and mitigate risk till that gets settled, then the money comes in there. But we first encourage people to look at the qualitative aspects of the future state in order to stabilize the workforce and retain key talent. We talked about entanglements, which is how embedded the carve co is into the parent. So understanding those, deft navigation of that to the ultimate stand up opportunities while dealing with the regulatory environment. There actually was a question about how do TSAs fit into the entanglements. So I'll address that right now. For those that aren't aware of what TSAs are, basically what the seller says is we're going to continue supporting the sold company in various operations. That could be continuing access through IT systems. It could be performing financial management. And from the HR side, it could be continuing allowing use for HRIS systems, payroll processing, and benefits participation. So how it works into carve-outs is then the deal between the buyer and seller is that the seller will say, we're willing to support you in some or all of those activities for a period of time. Well, you ultimately get stood up on your own and build your own fit for purpose organization. So the buyer priority then is understanding the scope of the TSA, the duration, and how much time is going to be needed to get to that independent operational state. And then we've talked about some of these items in some of our other discussion, but these also remain buyer priorities.
Great. Thank you, Chuck. Good information. And of course, buyers and sellers have different priorities, but I think you covered the buyer priorities really, really well. Lots of people pieces in there, right? Retention of talent, cultural integration. It's a big part of a transaction for sure.
Yeah, some people might say actually the deals won or lost by the people, because if we ultimately don't stabilize the people and have the right people in the right place doing the right thing at the right time, there's a significant opportunity for devaluation of the business and are not really realizing the maximum value of that opportunity.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Wonderful. All right, well, let's keep moving. And Abhi, maybe you can talk a little bit about what a carve-out really looks like in practice, right? What a real-life case study. Everybody loves case studies. Let's talk about how this worked from beginning to end.
Sure, Susan, sounds good. So let me talk about a recent carve-out transaction that both Chuck and I worked on, which had various elements of complexity that we just talked about. So this was a global deal. Our client was the buyer, a private equity firm, primarily based out of US, buying a technology product from a huge conglomerate. There were no HR TSAs in scope, which is always fun, right? No TSAs, short time between sign and close of like 60 days. And then we also realized later on that there were gaps in defining the deal perimeter, leading to a backfill of about 10% of the entire workforce. That was critical for day one. The way we approached it was to have a comprehensive people strategy with which aligns with the deal thesis. And to begin with, we had a fit-for-purpose org design aligned with the enterprise op model. We knew that 10% of the population of the entire workforce needs to be hired for that is day one critical. So we also had a fast-paced talent acquisition plan to support the hiring needs. But as anyone would imagine, it's not easy to hire people within a 60-day period in a global transaction, right, across the globe. So we did also leverage interim support models. So as an example, Mercer supported interim HR support for the HR leader and 2 HR VPs. That worked until the private equity firm was able to secure full-time employees in that position. We also supported full implementation of employer of record across 14 countries. And last but not the least, we had a comprehensive change management and communications plan to facilitate the smooth transition. And I do see one of the comments is about how do we have a good change in communications plan that's effective, right, for smooth transition. So maybe I'll talk a little bit about what we did in this transaction to that point, right? So we started with doing a change impact analysis, identifying who the stakeholders are, right, internally and externally. Once you know who the stakeholders are, you want to make sure that the communications to them reach in time, right? So it's a multifaceted approach wherein, you'd start with the initial communications, but also regular updates to the employees and other stakeholders to make sure they stay up to date about the change and are, in fact, eager about the change as opposed to being anxious for the change. So that worked really well for us. It obviously had to be in alignment with external communication strategy because we wouldn't want employees to hear something from external sources as opposed to their own company, right? So that was also a key consideration while we developed this change in communications plan. So this is just one of the case studies, Susan, that we're talking about, but we routinely work on multiple transactions like these, which are even more complex at times. So I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, no, excellent case study and story. And I know there are many where this one came from in terms of the work that you have done, but it's always great to have a practical example. All right. And I think we've got some more questions on change and retention, things like that. We'll come back to those in the Q&A if there's additional information we can add. So let me wrap us up with this final question. In the context of carve-out transactions, and what other types of transactions, really share some similar characteristics and considerations? And maybe Chuck, you can speak to that one.
Yeah, thanks, Susan. Appreciate it. Yeah, there's actually a handful that are close cousins to carve-outs, if not also are involved in carve-outs. So the first one that comes to mind are joint ventures or JVs. In fact, not only are carve-outs messy and challenging, JVs are messy and challenging because, in fact, many JVs, in fact, are carve-outs. It just happens to potentially be carve-outs from multiple organizations. And then it's further complicated by then having to integrate two carve-outs into some version of a standalone company. The other interesting aspect of carve-outs is many carve-outs may in fact be JVs when it's not two parties coming together, but one carve-out where the seller retains financial interest in the company that it's carving out. And so we see that in a number of cases. And this goes back to the question about what's going on in the market demand and things of that nature, is that many companies, when they're doing their strategic evaluation, do want to exit a business, but not entirely. They just want to stop investing in it directly. So they'll keep a financial interest, let somebody else invest in it and operate in it, but still reap some of the benefits because there's value there. So JVs and carve-outs have a whole bunch of different flavors and types to them. IPOs are a close cousin to a certain degree, and the distinctive difference of an IPO and why it resembles a carve-out sometimes is in the stand-up nature of it. because prior to IPO, companies operating as a private company.
Mhm.
When it goes to a public company, there are certain additional operations, functions, or people roles that are needed to facilitate the IPO and therefore operate as a publicly traded company. There's also deals known as outsourcing deals. And an outsourcing deal is when certain industry organizations, such as tech services firm, factory building services firms, will hire from a company their workforce. The term is called rebadging, rebadge them from the seller to now the service provider. And so in essence, that's a carve out of that distinct work group and a rehiring by the service firm. And it also has some of the characteristics of a carve out because I'm extracting a segment of the workforce and a segment of operations from a larger conglomerate and moving that other into another organization. So those just happen to be three that share some of the characteristics and have the same type of needs and activities and considerations of going through that deal continuum life cycle that we looked at in one of our earlier slides.
Yeah, that was very helpful. Obviously, there are some transactions that definitely share some characteristics. So thank you for running through those. Okay, well, lots of information, fantastic discussion. Thank you so much, Chuck and Abby. I'll just quickly wrap us up here, and then we'll have some time for Q&A in a few minutes. So I do hope everybody learned something new about carve-outs from the conversation. Lots of great information. I certainly carve out transactions. They're very messy, they're very complex, and having experts to help you navigate and bring that experience and those best practices can definitely help to ensure success. So if you'd like any more information on how Mercer can help, please reach out to our experts. You can see their contact information, Chuck, Abby, Jeff Black, who's not with us today, but is part of the team. Their contact information is listed on this slide. So David, I think I'm turning it back to you.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to echo your point, really. What was kind of fascinating is that the terms carve out and divestment sound rather kind of theoretical. They sound rather possible. They sound almost easy. I think when you start to introduce the words messy and entanglement and people, that's where we can really see the kind of complexity and the challenge coming in. Certainly getting the right support for a complex project such as this is certainly money well spent. There are lots of comments, lots of questions. I'm just going to give the Mercer team a minute to kind of gather their thoughts, if you like, because there are some great questions that I know they can answer in a kind of similarly great way. Whilst they're doing that, I'm just going to introduce my colleague Nicole, who is our head of business development, just to give you an idea of some of the events we've got coming up. Nicole.
Thanks so much, David. Appreciate it. So at the Institute for Mergers, Acquisitions, and Alliances, we offer certification programs and trainings, and we have some exciting upcoming events taking place. We have our interactive online live program, which is covering our international mergers and acquisitions expert program, as well as our certified post-merger integration program and our legal mergers integration expert program as well. This will be taking place from May through July. We also have an exciting event coming up in London, taking place from the 10th to the 14th. This is going to be including our international mergers and acquisitions expert, our CPMI, our certified post-merger integration program, as well as our mergers and acquisitions professional program. In addition to London, we're also going to be stateside. We're going to be in New York City from the end of June, from the 24th to the 28th. This is also going to feature our IM&A program, as well as our certified post-merger integration program and our mergers and acquisitions professional program. Finally, we're going to be capping off our on-site events with our program in Singapore. That's going to be covering our IM&A program as well as our CPMI program. So we're excited for these upcoming events. And I'll go ahead and hand back over to, I believe, Susan.
Well, we've got some fantastic questions that are coming in. So let me put the first one up here. So a lot of culture questions, change management. So here's the question. So how can organizations integrate different corporate cultures when a carve-out leads to merging with another company or forming a completely new entity?
Sure, I'm happy to take that question. It's a great question, Susan. I must say, it's a great question. Often, when we see our corporate buyers buying carve outs and integrating it with their existing firm, there are different challenges with the cultures, right? Because most of the time, the carved out portion employees are coming from a large enterprise and move into, either be a standalone or move into the corporate business of another company, which may not be always same or similar, right? So the way we approach it is to first understand the buyer's vision, understand what is the end game for the carved out entity, right? And then also, if it's an integration with an existing company, then understand and assess the cultural differences of both of these companies. And I'll make sure it's aligned with the buyer's vision in the end, right? So assessing the corporate cultures, making sure that there is a culture action plan to get us to where we need to be from the buyer standpoint is what we often do. But again, it's not something that's done in the short term. It's really a long-term thing that we do. When you assess the cultures, understand what are the differences, how do you actually plan to be on the same side of the cultures, you'd need to plan effectively and then kind of go from there. So I'd say definitely take expert help when assessing cultural challenges and to plan a detailed to develop a detailed culture action plan.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely right. Thank you, Abby.
Yeah.
I mean, that cultural action plan is really important. Go ahead, Chuck. Do you want to add?
Yeah, I was going to jump in a little bit if I could, Susan. Thanks, and Abby,
Yeah.
totally agree with everything you said. I want to doubly emphasize one thing you said in this notion about culture, plan, integration, and assimilation, that it's not a one and done. This is something that occurs over time with repeated set of activities that are aligned with each other over a period of time, because moving cultures is not a wave the magic wand kind of thing. The other principle that I would offer up to the group is, you ask 10 people what culture is, and you're going to get 10 different answers. And so one of the perspectives that we have at Mercer about, in fact, what is culture and how you do and can manage it, which we believe is manageable, is first determining what we like to call the hard wiring of an organization. And so that hard wiring of the organization is the thing like the organization structure and op model, the leadership capabilities and leadership alignment, the way the organization communicates, in fact, the type of employee plans, programs, and systems that are there. So those are actually well-defined hard wiring of the organization that creates the environment now that we want our workforce to operate in. So once we have that hard wiring identified and create the environment that we want them to operate in, you can then start to articulate what are the behaviors and outcomes we want, and how do we motivate those behaviors and outcomes to create the culture we're looking for. So that's why that culture plan is important. The not one and done aspect of it is important, and the ability to manage it over time is in fact available and manageable.
Yeah, cultural change takes time, not one and done. Completely agree. Thank you both. That was great. So maybe, Chuck, if you want to take this one on retention strategy, there's a question about key talent, right, and the importance of that, the retention strategy around key knowledge experts in the business or technologies in the business, and then how that approach or how that impacts the deal value capture, I guess.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. And thanks for that question, Justin. So again, I'll start off with the macro principle about retention and to the point of your question in key talent and looking, the first aspect of identifying the needs for retention is in fact to do that talent assessment and what key and critical talent really is. And it's not always just the executive leadership of the organization. It could be depending on the type of deal it is and the type of skills that are needed, skills that are perhaps needed in the engineering sector, or if the deal thesis is around R&D, that we want to make sure the R&D organization is intact. So we first start with the deal thesis. Why is the company being purchased or carved out or stood up? What the value drivers of that organization is, and who are the people or skills or capabilities that are going to drive for that. So then the key talent emerges out of that based off of both the operating needs, the commercial needs, or other aspects. The other element to then put that filter through is that retention needed for short term, intermediate term, or long term? In some cases, there might be some very key and critical talent. Let's go back to the TSA discussion that we had, that if we're carving out a business, it's an incomplete business, we have significant stand-up work to do, we're getting TSAs from a seller, and then therefore part of us as the carve-out need to stand up a finance organization, an HR organization, and an IT organization. Let's just make it complicated. We have to stand up the whole thing. So we're going to need a number of people for a short period of time to facilitate that transition and transaction and ensure who they are, what they need to do, and how we need to retain them and then motivate them to transition out of the TSA and stand up the organization. That might be a 6-month deal. Then once we're in our steady state, the needs of the business and the talent may change, and therefore our retention strategy may change. And so our programs are then going to be aligned to, do we need somebody 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 24 months, and develop the retention strategies accordingly. So Justin, hopefully you got to the essence of your question there.
Thank you, Chuck. That was very helpful, and I think you did. So hopefully Justin does as well. So I think we've got two more we'll try to fit in here. I think we've got time. So there was a question about the preference for a share or an asset deal. I don't know, Chuck, do you want to take that one? That's like from Yvette. Yvette, yeah.
Yeah, sure. Hi, Yvette. So I'll start off with, in fact, for those on the call that aren't fully familiar with the distinction between an asset deal and a stock deal or a share deal, I usually like to use the analogy of buying a house. So in a stock deal, you're actually buying the house and you're buying all the contents in the house, and you become the new owner of that house and everything that's in it. So I'm really stepping into being the new owner of the house. In an asset deal, I'm buying the contents of the house. So the owner of the house actually is keeping it. I'm going to the yard sale and buying the things that I want, and then I'm putting it into the house I already own. So that's the difference between a stock and an asset deal. As far as is there a preference for it? In some cases, we as the buyer don't have a choice in that, because it's a function of how the seller is set up and what they're selling. The key distinction of a share and an asset deal from a workforce perspective is in a share deal, there's no break in employment. And so the workers feel this business continuity with their existing employer. And in an asset deal, there's actually a termination and a rehire with the buyer. So that creates actually additional complexities, disruption for the workers, and things of that nature. Ideally, then, if we go back to that, I would say then there's a preference for a share deal because we're getting the house intact, and then therefore it's less disruption for the workers. That up for us in many cases because of what's in the house that we're getting versus having to stand up an impartial business from an asset deal.
Great. Love that analogy. That's awesome. All right. So we have a question here on the challenges. What challenges that HR change managers have to overcome when working with technical teams on a carve-out transaction? Chuck, do you want to tackle that one?
Let's see. What challenges HR change manager had to overcome in working with technical teams? Yeah. So, and this is actually going to go back to many of the things that Abhi talked about in the context of the change strategy, the stakeholder analysis, what's changing, and identifying those stakeholders at a granular level. I make anchor a little bit on, since technical aspects are more visible than the intangible people side. There actually are lots of tangible people side, because it does, Tyson, notwithstanding your question, our point of view is that there actually is tremendous tangible aspects to the people side, particularly as it relates to the kind of work they need to do and how work needs to be done in the organization. So if we go back to our earlier slide on the enterprise view of an organization and the front, middle, back of an organization, there are many technical streams and substreams there, whether it's in R&D, manufacturing, supply chain and sourcing, distribution, logistics. And so if that's what you mean by the technical side, it's really understanding from that worker perspective in the carved out company how their work environment is going to be different, because they may be in a different org design, operating model, system structure, governance model, delegation of authority. And so all of those things that generate how they do their work on a day-to-day basis across system, process, structure, governance are going to change, and therefore require significant change in communication to understand those things. Abhi, anything else you'd add to that?
No, I think you covered it pretty well, Chuck.
Okay, thanks.
I think we're going to try
so,
to
Tyson,
get
hopefully
one.
that answered your question too.
Thanks, Chuck. I think we have time for one more, if we can. Yeah, this is the technology and tool discussion, right? So what is out there and in terms of tools to assist in optimizing the people strategy during a carve-out, especially, and of course, remote hybrid work environments get involved, which is today's world. So Abhi, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. This is an interesting question. Also, because, not just for remote or hybrid work environments, but also we've seen transactions where many times employees may not have regular access, for example, in manufacturing, to computers, right? Or collaboration tools. So that's kind of an interesting question. In terms of technologies or tools that can assist, I think it needs to be, again, it's not a one size fits all in terms of what works for everyone. It has to be thought through depending on what the transaction is, what the deal strategy is, how much do we want to reach out to, what stakeholders. So again, it's part of the change and communications plan to understand the stakeholders, make sure we're reaching out to them. There are multiple technology platforms, the collaboration platforms, right, that we have these days that we could reach out to employees with, right? Even if employees don't have access to laptops, they would have access to smartphones. So typically what we do in such transactions is have a list of frequently answered questions called FAQs up there for employees, and they have the contacts to reach out to, who to reach out to, and when, depending on what type of question that is, right? And it could be either through town halls that we answer, we reach out to them regularly, or it could be via emails, could be via collaboration platforms. Again, not one size fits all, but there could be multiple platforms, multiple forums where we reach out, where the company should be reaching out to employees for regular updates. Chuck, anything else to add from your standpoint?
No, I think that covers it really well, and I totally agree with that.
Great. I think that's all of our questions. So David, there you go. I'll let you wrap us up with any final remarks.
Thank you, everyone. Well, that's sadly all we have time for today. Fascinating conversation.
Like
Thank you to everyone who participated. Oh, I was just saying thank you to everyone. Thank you to everyone that participated. Thank you for the great questions. Thank you to our friends at Mercer, Susan, Abhi, and Chuck. We will see you again at our next webinar. If you have any questions for us at the Institute, please do get in touch. And of course, if you require support from Mercer, you know where they are. Thank you all.